Hi everyone, can you hear me? I hope that you all are doing fine today. Hi everyone. So I hope that you all are doing fine. Today we will have simple, compound, and complex. So we have simple, compound, complex, and compound complex from the grade 7. So we have two lessons to complete. We have identify dependent and independent clauses. Is the sentence simple, compound, complex, or compound complex? Okay, so first you need to note that a clause is a group of words that contains both a subject and a predicate. So a clause will always have a subject and a predicate. Now, under the clauses, we have independent clauses and dependent clauses. So, an independent clause is a complete thought. So, whenever you have the independent clause, you need to note that it is a complete thought. It can stand alone as a sentence, okay? So, an independent clause is a complete thought and it stands alone as a sentence. And then we also have a dependent clause. So, we have two clauses under the clause, right? So, the independent and the dependent clause. So, a dependent clause is not a complete thought, all right? A dependent clause does not form a complete thought. It can stand alone. It cannot stand alone as a sentence. So take note of the clause, a group of words that contains both subject and predicate, and then under clause you have independent clause and dependent clause. All right. So for the independent clause, just like the name independent, it is a complete thought and it stands alone as a sentence. So it's like a complete sentence. And then the dependent clause is not a complete thought. It cannot stand alone as a sentence. Right? So we have an example. Let's pick up some sandwiches for Pete's Cafe from Pete's Cafe. So it says, let's pick up some sandwiches from Pete's Cafe. The clause can stand alone. It is independent. So you can see here that it is an independent clause and it can stand alone. Then we have after Kelvin gets off work. After Kelvin gets off work, the clause cannot stand alone. So after Kelvin gets off work. Now when we say the clause cannot stand alone, it is dependent. So why can't this clause stand alone? Because it just says after Kelvin gets off work. So what happens after Kelvin gets off work? So we have no idea, right? So yeah. So that's it for like the independent clause and the dependent clause. So you should be able to understand the difference of both of them. All right. Okay, so we have a complex sentence now. A complex sentence is made up of an independent clause and a dependent clause. So remember that under our clauses, we have independent and dependent, right? So when we have the clause, we have independent and dependent. And then when we have a complex sentence, it is made up of independent clause and a dependent clause. Okay? The dependent clause is a complex sentence, all right? The dependent clause is a complex sentence. Usually begins with a subordinating conjunction. All right, so you have to note that the dependent clause in a complex sentence usually begins with a subordinating conjunction. So we have what we call the subordinating conjunction or relative pronoun. Okay? So subordinating conjunctions include all this over here. So we have although, after, as, because, before, if, since, unless, until, when, and while. So all these are the subordinating conjunction. And then we also have the relative pronouns. We have that, which, who, whom, or whose. Okay? Okay, so you have to take note of the complex sentence. So let's pick up some sandwiches from Pete's Cafe after Kelvin gets off work. All right. So after here is a subordinating conjunction. All right. So the dependent clause begins with a subordinating conjunction. So whenever you want to note a dependent clause, it begins with a subordinating conjunction. So when you have the subordinating conjunction starting the sentence, then you know that that is a dependent clause. So we have all the subordinating conjunctions here. So you just take note of that from here. Then we have also relative pronouns also. So we have during his trip to Italy, Tony visited the Trevi fountain, which is in Rome. So which is the relative pronoun. Okay, so the dependent clause begins with the relative pronoun which. All right. So let's look at some examples. Okay, so over here we have the audience have adored for more than a century. That audience have adored for more than a century is a dependent clause. It begins with a relative pronoun that. So this is starting with that. So you have to know that this is a subordinating conjunction, and then that means it is a dependent clause. Okay, so yeah. So we also have this one here. Women could not vote until more than a decade after her death. So it's a independent clause. So it's an independent clause. It can stand alone as a sentence. Okay, so we'll move on to the test. So it says to select the independent clause. So we have to look at this both sentences and then we will choose which one is the independent clause. So we have the hand, a 4-inch unit of length, has traditionally been used for determining a horse's height, which is measured from the ground to the top of the horse's waiters or shoulder area. Now we have both of these, so we are looking for the independent clause. So what will be the independent clause now? Okay, you can check. Then you can share your answers on the chat if you have an independent clause here. So which one? So if you say from which is measured from the ground to the top of the horse's withers or shoulder area, which is what a relative pronoun. So the independent clause has to be the first part because once it starts with a relative pronoun or subordinating conjunction, then you know it's a dependent clause. So it's asking for dependent clause. Some farmers prefer organic fertilizer because they enrich the soil and are free of harmful chemicals. So which is the independent clause here? And then we also have this one here. So is it the first part or the second part? So what do you think? So what do you think is the dependent clause here? So the dependent clause we have because. So because here is what? A subordinating conjunction. So you need to note that from that part is where we have the dependent clause. So this also we need to find the dependent clause. As Americans' cotton production dramatically increased in the 18,000s, the demand for slave labor are also intensified. So what is the dependent clause here? Which one is the dependent clause? So you can tell me. So let's see. So it has to be dependent clause, right? So let's look at it. Is it from the beginning or from the ending? So we have as here. As is a subordinating conjunction. So even though it's starting the sentence, then it is a dependent clause. Okay. So we have also select the dependent clause. Before he became the 39th president, Jimmy Carter had been a Jimmy Carter had been a naval lieutenant and a peanut farmer. So dependent clause. So before is what? A subordinating conjunction, so it's gonna be the first one. So we have also select independent clause. So now this is the independent clause. So if a word is spelled the same forward and backward, for example, civic, rotator, radar, kayak, or did, it is a palindrome. So what is the independent clause here? What would be the independent clause? So what will be the independent clause here? So we have the second because the first one starts with if, and if is also a subordinating conjunction. So we have Josephine Cochrane, a wealthy socialite and inventor, designed the first dishwasher because her servants were demanding her good china. So independent clause. Where's the starting? Okay. So the second one says because, but then the second one because is a subordinating conjunction, but it's asking for independent, so it has to be the first. Okay. Okay. So we have independent clause here as well. When locusts congregate into huge swarms, they can devour millions of pounds of plants in a single day. So independent clause. What is the independent clause here? So the first when is a relative pronoun, so it cannot be the right one. It has to be the second because the second says they can devour millions of pounds of plants in a single day. Okay, so that's it for like the identify dependent and independent clause. You can let me know in the chat if you have any questions. Do you have any questions or no? Before we move on to the second lesson, do you have any questions? So, do you have any questions? Okay, so let's move on to the second lesson, which is the sentence simple, compound, complex, or compound complex? So we have also the clause. Of course, we know the clause, so it's the same. So the clause is the same. It has subject and predicate. And when we say subject and predicate, we just simply mean that it has subject and a verb. Okay. And then we have an independent clause under the clauses. So we have independent and dependent clause. Then we also have that the independent clause is a complete thought. It can stand alone, just like we said earlier. And then the dependent clause is not a complete thought and cannot stand alone as a sentence. So remember that dependent cannot stand alone. So we have the oranges on our tree are ripe. This clause can stand alone. So it is what? Independence. All right. And then we have, after we pick up Kelvin from work, the clause cannot stand alone. It is dependent. Okay, so you see that it's dependent, it's a dependent clause. So now we have the um, simple sentence. A simple sentence is made up of a single independent clause. So you have to take note of that. This is made up of a single independent clause. Remember that the independent is the complete thought that stands alone. So Ben and I spent all day relaxing by the pool. Okay. So Ben and I spent all day relaxing by the pool. Now we have some simple sentences have introductory phrases, but the introductory phrases is part of the predicates. Okay. So it's part of the predicates. Like in the winter, Ben usually wears his heavy coat, and Ben usually wears his heavy coat in the winter. Okay, so that's it for like the simple sentence. Just take notes that it is independence. Okay. So we have a compound sentence. A compound sentence is made up of two independent clauses. So when you have compound sentence made up of two independent clauses joined by a coordinating conjunction. So it's joined by a coordinating conjunction, and we have four coordinating conjunctions which are and, but, or, so. So all these are the coordinating conjunctions over here. So therefore, and compound sentences is just joined by the two independent. So remember that the independent are the ones that can stand alone from a complete thought. So yeah. Okay. So just like the sentence we have, we saw the flash of lightning, and seconds later we heard a rumble of thunder. So all those two sentences are independent, and they are joined by a conjunction which is and a comma. Okay. So that's it for like the compound sentences. Moving on, we have the complex sentence. A complex sentence is made up of an independent clause. So take notes. Complex sentence is made up of independent and a dependent clause. So it's a mixture of both. Just like what we did like in the first lesson, the dependent clause is a complex sentence, usually begins with a subordinating conjunction. So just like we did first of all, okay? So it's either subordinating or relative pronoun. That's it for the complex sentence. So we have the subordinating after, although, as, because, before, if. So we have all these subordinating conjunction. Okay, so relative pronoun also we have that, which, who, whom, whose. Okay, so we also have relative pronoun. So we have if here. If she ever gets the chance, Terry would love to visit the Egyptian pyramids. So if is a subordinating conjunction, and it started a sentence, which means that the first part is a dependent clause, the second is independent. So we also have, during his trip to Italy, Tony visited the Trevi Fountain, which is in Rome. So which is a relative pronoun. So means that the second part of the sentence is the relative pronoun. So a compound complex sentence now. After the complex sentence, we have compound complex. So compound complex sentence is made up of two independent clauses and one dependent. So when it is compound complex, two independent clauses and one dependent clause. So after Samantha left home, so after here is a dependent. She stopped at the bank and then she went to the gym. So she stopped at the bank, one sentence, then she went to the gym is the other sentence. That's why it has two independent clauses. So sometimes a dependent clause in a complex or compound complex sentence can interrupt an independent clause. So sometimes it can interrupt, just like we have orcas that are kept in cavities, often have bent dorsal fins. So orcas that are kept in cavity often have bent dorsal fins. So that's it for this part. We'll move on to the test, but you can ask any question if you have any. Do you have any questions? You can let me know. So you can ask any questions if you have any. Okay. So we have this one, the first, it says, which type of sentence is this? We have to decide what sentence this is. Annual plants survive only one season and must be replaced each year, but perennials return each year with new flowers and foliage. So, complex or the compound? So, it has to be compound because we have but here and then we have the comma. So, remember that the compound sentences are joined with the conjunctions. All right. So, this one, Lorraine Hansberry wrote the wildly acclaimed 1959 Broadway play A Racing in the Sun, and her accomplishments opened the door for other African American playwrights. So, compound or simple? Uh-huh. So, is it compound or simple? So, we have here the and we have the comma. So, meaning that this is what compound sentence, right? Okay, so we have Cal always approaches difficult tasks enthusiastically, and he frequently motivates others with his energy and fervor. So, what is this one now? So we have and we have a comma. So that would be what would that be? Simple or compound sentence? So we have the compound sentence. All right. So we have which type of sentence is this? The weather forecast had predicted severe thunderstorm, but the dark, heavy thunderclouds never materialized. So, what kind of sentence is this? Is this going to be a complex sentence or a compound sentence? So, what do you think? So, what kind of sentence would this be? So, we still have a compound sentence because we have the conjunction there, but. Okay? So, what type of sentence is this? So we have Diego took several incredible panoramic photographs of the sweeping view from the top of Table Mountain. So is it the simple or complex? So Diego took several incredible panoramic photographs of the sweeping view from the top of Table Mountain. So a simple sentence because it has the subject and has the verb and it can stand alone. So it's an independent clause. All right. So since it takes approximately 1000 years for a used printer cartridge to decompose, recycling these plastic ink dispensers help the environment. So is this a compound sentence or a complex sentence? So this will be a complex sentence. All right. So the maple leaf, which is Canada's national emblem, has been associated with the country since the 17,000s. So, what do you think? Compound or the complex sentence? So this is a complex sentence. It has two independent and one dependent clause. Okay, so that's it for our lesson today. You have to make sure that you complete the two lessons that we've done in case you haven't done it before. And if you need more help, you can click on this chat button here and then you can get more help. But before we finish, you can let me know in the chat if you have any questions. So, any questions? Okay, so since you have no questions, we'll end now for today. Until next time, bye everyone.